The Australian labour market finished 2019 on a fairly strong note. In December, the total employment rose 29,000, following on from a strong 39,000 gain in November. With the participation rate holding around record highs, the unemployment rate dipped down from 5.2 to 5.1%. Considering this, in the video we'll take a step back and look at what the year was for the labour market. The Australian labour market is clearly better than people had anticipated. The unemployment rate has fallen since the last RBA meeting, and that clearly has given the RBA some space to pause, consider what they're going to do next. However, what I want to do today is take a bit more of a deeper look through the year of what's happened in the Australian labour market, how it's changed, and what important messages we can take from it. Now, as we noted, in the year, total employment grew 263,000. That's an annual pace of around 2.1%. Now, compare that to 2018 when you had employment growth growing at closer towards 2.1%. So we will get this sort of slightly softer pace of employment growth coming through. Still a very robust number. However, more importantly, what we did see was the unemployment rate in the December quarter of 2018 was 5.1%, and this year in the December quarter was 5.2%. So we've actually seen a drift up through the year in the unemployment rate. Now, why was that so? Well, the main reason for this happening was the fact that we're having more people looking for work out there in the labour market. The participation rate, that is the share of people who are working and also those who are out there looking for work, rose through the year. And it rose at a faster pace than the employment growth was doing, which resulted in this higher unemployment rate. Now, the story gets interesting when you start looking at the nature of the employment. So full-time employment grew 153,000 in a year. Contrast that to part-time employment, which grew at 110,000. However, when you break it down, you can see that the full-time employment was only growing at 1.3% through the year. Because it comes off a larger base, there's more full-time workers out there, it's growing at a slower pace. However, part-time employment, those numbers represent a 3.1% growth in part-time work. So what you can see here is a changing nature of the employment in the Australian labour market. We're increasingly employing people at a part-time nature. They've got a growing share, and they're the fastest growing share of the labour market. It even becomes more interesting when we look at employment by gender. Female employment through the year grew at 177,000, or that is 3.3%. Male employment, by contrast, grew 77,000, or 1.3%. So you can see here we're also having a shift again. At this point in time, there is more males employed in the workforce than there are females. But females are growing much more rapid pace, not even just in the pace of growth, but in absolute numbers. So again, you can see this new shift happening, greater growth in part-time work and greater growth in female employment. Now, I guess some people will probably propose that more women are working in the workforce is explaining this growth in part-time employment. However, that is not the case. So in the year, female employment grew 120,000. Their part-time employment lifted by 56,000. Contrast that with males, where you saw a lift in full-time employment of 52,000 and a lift of 57,000 in part-time employment. So you're seeing here now that female employment is being dominated by full-time employment, and it's where most of the growth is occurring. Whereas male employment is actually on the level, is slightly greater for part-time employment than full-time employment. So this shifting nature of full-time and part-time employment is more apparent amongst male employment than female employment, and female employment is the one that's dominating full-time employment. There really is a big shift happening in the Australian labour market. Now, if we look back to 2018, we see that male employment was growing in total at a faster pace than female employment. But what is really interesting is if you then step back and look into it again, what you see is even in 2018, male full-time employment at the margin was growing less than their part-time employment. So this trend has been happening for a while. What was different in 2020, this year in 2019, was this big dominance of females in full-time employment and the shift there. Next week, looking ahead, we get a bit of an update on the Australian economy through the NAB Business Survey and of course the Australian Westpac Melbourne Institute Leading Indicator. Both these will help us get a bit more upbeat on how the economy is starting to track in the first half of 2020. We'll also be getting an update on the CPI, the December quarter numbers. Looking at that, what we're seeing is a bit of an uptick coming through from fuel prices and of course tobacco prices. But overall, the annual rate of inflation remains well contained around 1.8%, and of course the core measures remain well below the RBA's target band at 1.5%. And we'll see you again next week with another update from the Westpac economics team.